What happens when a late-night talk show host pushes one of country music's biggest legends too far? In just 34 seconds, Seth Meyers went from smug interviewer to speechless bystander as Faith Hill walked off his set in the most dramatic exit late-night television has ever witnessed. This was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Faith Hill, the woman who gave us Breathe, This Kiss, and countless other hits that shaped a generation, sitting down for what everyone assumed would be a light, fun conversation. But what started as a typical late-night interview quickly spiraled into something nobody in that studio was prepared for. Faith walked out onto that stage looking absolutely stunning. The audience erupted. You could feel the energy, the excitement. She waved, smiled, and settled into the guest chair opposite Seth Meyers. The applause died down. Seth leaned back in his chair with that casual demeanor he always has, the kind that makes you think everything is going to be friendly and relaxed. "Faith Hill, welcome to the show," Seth said with a grin. "Thank you so much for having me," Faith replied, her southern charm on full display. "So," Seth began, shuffling some cards on his desk, "you've been in the music business for, what, 100 years now?" There was a pause. The audience gave an uncomfortable laugh. Faith's smile tightened just a bit around the edges. "Well, that's certainly one way to introduce someone," she said, keeping her tone light, but there was something in her eyes. A flicker of something. Seth didn't seem to notice, or maybe he just didn't care. He pressed forward. No, I'm kidding, of course. But seriously, you've been around a long time. Do you ever feel like country music has just passed you by? Like maybe your sound is a little, dated?" The audience went quiet. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was something else. Faith sat up a little straighter in her chair. "Dated?" she repeated, her voice calm, but you could hear the edge creeping in. "I don't think making timeless music that still resonates with millions of people is dated, Seth." Sure, Seth said, waving his hand dismissively. "But let's be honest, when was your last real hit? I mean, not to be rude, but the younger crowd, they don't really know who you are, do they?" Faith's jaw tightened. You could see it happening in real time. The smile was completely gone now. "Actually, Seth, I just had a song chart last year, and my tours still sell out arenas across the country. So I'm not sure where you're getting your information." But Seth wasn't backing down. If anything, he was leaning in harder. "Okay, but be real with me," he said, that smirk still plastered on his face. "Don't you think at some point you have to accept that your moment has kind of come and gone? I mean, there are so many fresh, new artists out there doing interesting things. What do you really have left to offer?" The air in that studio changed. You could feel it. Even the audience seemed to collectively hold their breath. Faith stared at Seth for a long moment. Her hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests, were now gripping them tightly. "What do I have left to offer?" she said slowly, deliberately. "Seth, I've sold over 40 million albums. I've won 5 Grammys. I've performed for presidents and packed stadiums around the world. I've written songs that have become part of people's lives, part of their weddings, their celebrations, their heartbreaks. So forgive me if I don't feel like I need to justify my relevance to someone who reads jokes off cards for a living." The audience gasped. Some people even started applauding but quickly stopped, unsure if they were allowed to. Seth's face flushed red. He clearly wasn't expecting that response. "Wow, okay," he said, trying to laugh it off, but his voice had an edge to it now too. "Somebody's a little sensitive tonight." "Sensitive?" Faith shot back. "No, Seth. I'm a professional who agreed to come on your show to talk about my new music, not to be insulted and condescended to." "I'm not insulting you," Seth said, his voice rising slightly. "I'm asking legitimate questions. This is what I do. If you can't handle a little pushback, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews." Faith stared at him, and for a moment, it looked like she might just let it go. But then Seth made his biggest mistake of the night. "You know what your problem is?" Seth continued, clearly feeling like he needed to regain control of the situation. "You're used to everyone kissing your feet because you're Faith Hill. But out here in the real world, in places like New York, people don't care about some country singer from Mississippi who had a few hits 20 years ago. That was it." That was the moment everything exploded. Faith stood up, not slowly, not hesitantly. She just stood straight up from that chair, reached up to her microphone pack and pulled it off. "Some country singer?" she said, her voice steady but filled with fury. "A few hits? Seth, You are one of the most disrespectful, arrogant, self-important people I have ever had the misfortune of sitting across from." "Oh, come on," Seth said, trying to play it cool, but you could see the panic starting to set in. This was live television, and his guest was clearly about to walk. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a conversation." "No?" Faith said firmly, placing her microphone on the chair. "A conversation requires mutual respect. What this is you trying to tear me down to make yourself feel bigger. And I don't need to sit here and take it." Seth stood up now too, clearly trying to salvage the situation. "Faith, wait. Let's just take a breath and—" "I've taken plenty of breaths, Seth. And every single one I've taken sitting in this chair has been a waste. You invited me here under the pretense of a respectful interview. Instead, you've spent the last several minutes insulting my career, my music, and my legacy." The audience was completely silent now. Every camera in that studio was trained on Faith and Seth, capturing every second of this meltdown. "You're overreacting," Seth said, and you could hear the desperation in his voice now. His producers were probably screaming in his ear through his earpiece, telling him to fix this, to smooth it over, to do something. "Overreacting?" Faith's voice went up slightly. "Seth, you told me I was irrelevant. You told me I had nothing left to offer. You dismissed my entire career like it was some kind of joke. And now you want to tell me I'm overreacting? I didn't mean it like that," Seth stammered. "I was just trying to be provocative, to have an interesting conversation." "Well, congratulations," Faith said, grabbing her purse from beside the chair. "You definitely provoked something. You provoked me to remember why I usually avoid shows like this, because hosts like you think being rude is the same thing as being interesting." Seth reached out, not quite touching her but gesturing. "Faith, please, just sit back down. We can start over. Fresh start, okay? Let's talk about your new album." "My new album?" Faith laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The one you clearly didn't listen to? The one you couldn't be bothered to prepare actual questions about? No, Seth, I think I'm done here." "You can't just leave," Seth said, and now the panic was fully visible on his face. "We're in the middle of the show." "Watch me," Faith said simply. She turned toward the gap in the set where the backstage area was. Seth followed a few steps behind her, still trying to fix the situation, even though it was clearly beyond repair. "Faith, come on," he pleaded. "Don't do this. Think about your fans. They tuned in to see you." Faith stopped and turned back to face him. The cameras caught everything. Her expression, his panicked face, the stunned silence of everyone watching. "My fans?" she said quietly, but her voice carried across the entire studio. "Seth, my fans know who I am. They know what I've accomplished. They don't need you to validate me, and neither do I. What they're going to see tonight is someone standing up for themselves instead of sitting there and taking disrespect with a smile. Maybe that's a better lesson than any interview could have been." Seth opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say at that point? "Good luck with the rest of your show," Faith said, and there was finality in her voice. "I hope you find a guest who's willing to tolerate your behavior, because it won't be me." And then she walked. Not a storm off, not a dramatic run. She simply walked off that set with her head held high, her dignity intact, while Seth Meyers stood there looking absolutely lost. The camera swung back to Seth at his desk. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. The audience didn't know whether to clap, boo, or sit in silence. Most chose silence. Seth finally found his voice. "Well, that was something. Let's go to commercial." But before they could cut away, you could hear someone from the audience shout, "Good for her," and a smattering of applause broke out. Not for Seth, for Faith. When they came back from commercial, Seth tried to make a joke about it. "Well, that didn't go as planned," he said with a weak laugh. But nobody in that audience was laughing with him. The energy in the room had completely shifted. He tried to continue with the show, brought out his next guest, did his planned segments. But everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, knew they hadn't tuned in for any of that. They were still processing what they'd just witnessed. Because here's the thing about that moment, about what made it so powerful. Faith Hill didn't lose her temper and start yelling. She didn't throw anything or curse or have a complete breakdown. She simply refused to accept being treated poorly. She stood up, stated her case clearly and firmly, and removed herself from the situation. That's what made Seth look so bad in comparison. He couldn't claim she was being unreasonable or crazy or having a diva moment. She was calm, articulate, and absolutely right. He had been rude. He had been dismissive. He had insulted her repeatedly, and when she called him out on it, he tried to gaslight her into thinking she was overreacting. But the cameras don't lie. Everyone watching saw exactly what happened. They saw Seth's smirk, his condescending tone, his complete lack of respect for his guest. They saw him try to tear down a legendary artist for no reason other than, what? To seem edgy? To get a viral moment? Well, he got his viral moment, just not the kind he wanted. And Faith showed everyone watching that you don't have to sit there and take it when someone disrespects you, no matter who they are or what platform they have. She showed that walking away with your dignity is more powerful than any comeback line or witty retort. The audience in that studio knew it. That's why that person shouted support. That's why people applauded her, even as she was leaving. They recognized they were witnessing something real, something unscripted, something that needed to happen. Seth tried to maintain control after she left. He tried to act like everything was fine, like this was just another show, another night. But you could see it in his face, in the way he rushed through his remaining segments. He knew he'd messed up badly. His other guests that night seemed uncomfortable too. There was this awkward energy hanging over everything. When you watch someone get treated the way Faith was treated, and then you're expected to sit in that same chair and pretend everything is fine, that's not easy to do. The band played a little too enthusiastically during the transitions, trying to fill the dead air, trying to bring back some kind of normal energy. It didn't work. Nothing could erase what had just happened. Seth's monologue jokes fell flat. His desk pieces felt forced. Every smile looked strained. This wasn't how his show usually went, and everyone could tell. The ghost of Faith Hill's exit hung over the entire rest of the episode like a cloud. When he finally signed off at the end of the show, there was none of his usual charm or ease. He thanked everyone for watching, reminded them to tune in tomorrow, and that was it. No jokes, no callbacks to earlier bits, just a quick exit. The studio audience filed out quietly, many of them immediately pulling out their phones, texting and posting about what they'd just witnessed, because they knew they'd been present for something that was going to be talked about for a long time. And back to that moment, that pivotal 34 seconds where everything changed, where Faith Hill stood up, removed her microphone, and decided she was done. 34 seconds that exposed everything wrong with how Seth Meyers approached that interview. 34 seconds where a country music legend reminded everyone why she's a legend, and it has nothing to do with hits or awards or album sales. It's about self-respect. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. 34 seconds that turned what should have been a simple promotional appearance into one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history. Because when you disrespect Faith Hill, when you tell one of the best-selling country artists of all time that she's irrelevant and has nothing left to offer, when you condescend to her and then act surprised when she refuses to tolerate it, you deserve exactly what Seth Meyers got. You deserve to be left standing on your own set, speechless and embarrassed, while your guest walks away with her head held high and the respect of everyone watching. Seth wanted a memorable interview that night. He got one, just not in the way he planned. He wanted to seem smart and edgy by pushing back against his guest. Instead, he came across as exactly what he was in that moment. A disrespectful host who thought his platform gave him the right to tear down someone who had accomplished more in her career than he likely ever will. And Faith gave everyone watching a masterclass in grace under pressure, in standing up for yourself, in knowing when to walk away. She didn't need to raise her voice or cause a scene. She just needed to stop participating in her own disrespect. The moment she stood up, the moment she took off that microphone, the moment she said, "Watch me," when Seth claimed she couldn't just leave, she won. Not because she got the last word or had the best comeback. She won because she refused to play a game where the rules were designed to make her lose. That's what makes this whole thing so compelling. It's not just about a dramatic exit or a heated argument. It's about power dynamics and respect and what happens when someone refuses to be diminished. Seth Meyers sat behind that desk thinking he had all the power, the cameras, the platform, the home field advantage. He thought he could say whatever he wanted, and Faith would just smile and take it because that's what guests do. They play along. But Faith Hill didn't play along. She changed the game entirely by refusing to participate. And in doing so, she showed that the real power wasn't behind that desk. It was in her ability to walk away. Every question Seth asked was designed to undermine her, asking if her sound was dated, suggesting her moment had passed. claiming young people didn't know who she was, dismissing her as some country singer from Mississippi. Each question was a small cut, designed to make her defensive, to make her prove herself. But you can't diminish someone who knows their own worth. And Faith Hill knows exactly who she is and what she's accomplished. She didn't need to prove anything to Seth Meyers or anyone else watching that night. When she stood up and started listing her achievements, her Grammy wins, her album sales, her sold-out tours, she wasn't bragging. She was stating facts. Facts that Seth had conveniently ignored in his quest to be provocative. And when he tried to dismiss her response by calling her sensitive, that was the oldest trick in the book. Attack someone, and when they defend themselves, act like they're overreacting. Make them the problem instead of addressing your own behavior. But Faith didn't fall for it. She called it exactly what it was: disrespect dressed up as interesting conversation, rudeness masquerading as provocative interviewing. The beauty of her exit was in its simplicity. No grand speech, no dramatic pronouncements, just a clear, firm statement of boundaries. This is how you're treating me. I don't accept it. I'm leaving. And Seth's desperate attempts to get her to stay only made him look worse, begging her to sit back down, saying they could start fresh, telling her she was being dramatic. None of it worked because you can't smooth over genuine disrespect with hollow apologies and promises. The audience reaction said it all. That spontaneous support, that applause for Faith as she walked away, they weren't applauding because they hated Seth Meyers or loved drama. They were applauding because they recognized truth when they saw it. They'd watched the same interview everyone else had watched. They'd heard the same condescending questions, the same dismissive comments. They knew Faith was right to leave. More than that, they respected her for having the courage to do it. Because walking off a live television show takes guts. Especially when you're a woman in the entertainment industry, where you're often taught to be pleasant and accommodating no matter how you're treated. Where standing up for yourself can get you labeled as difficult or unprofessional. But Faith didn't care about any of that in that moment. She cared about her self-respect more than she cared about being liked or appearing easygoing. And that choice, that decision to prioritize her own dignity over public perception, was everything. The look on Seth's face said it all. Shock, panic, confusion. He genuinely didn't seem to understand why she was so upset. Which makes sense, because he probably thought he was just doing his job, being a late-night host, asking tough questions. But there's a difference between tough questions and disrespectful questions. Tough questions challenge. Disrespectful questions diminish. Seth crossed that line repeatedly and seemed genuinely surprised when there were consequences. When Faith told him he was one of the most disrespectful people she'd ever sat across from, that wasn't hyperbole. This is a woman who has done thousands of interviews over her decades-long career. She's sat across from every kind of interviewer imaginable. And Seth Meyers managed to stand out as uniquely disrespectful. That's actually an achievement, just not the kind you want to be known for. And when she pointed out that he reads jokes off cards for a living, that wasn't just a random insult. It was a pointed reminder that he was judging her career, her artistic output, her decades of creating music that has touched millions of people, while his job is to read words other people wrote for him. The irony of Seth Meyers questioning what Faith Hill has left to offer while he contributes virtually nothing original to the world wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. But beyond all of that, beyond the specific insults and the dramatic exit and the viral moment, there's something deeper happening in those 34 seconds. It's about what we tolerate and what we don't. It's about the difference between being professional and being a doormat. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Faith Hill didn't owe Seth Meyers or his show or that audience anything more than she'd already given. She showed up. She was prepared to do a good interview. She was gracious and professional right up until the moment Seth made it impossible to continue being those things. And then she made a choice. She chose herself. She chose her dignity. She chose to demonstrate that no platform, no audience, no television show is worth compromising your self-respect. That's the lesson in all of this. Not that guests should walk off shows at the first sign of difficulty, but that there's a line, and when someone crosses it repeatedly and unapologetically, you have every right to say enough. Faith Hill found her line that night, and when Seth Meyers crossed it one too many times, she walked, calmly, clearly, decisively, and in doing so, she created a moment that will be replayed and discussed and analyzed for years to come. Not because it was sensational or crazy or dramatic in the way. Reality TV is dramatic. But because it was real, it was a real person having a real reaction to really being disrespected and choosing to do something about it instead of just sitting there and taking it with a smile. That's what made it powerful. That's what made it memorable. That's what made it matter. Seth Meyers wanted a viral moment. He got one. He just ended up being the villain in it instead of the hero. And Faith Hill walked off that set with something more valuable than any promotional appearance could have given her. She walked off with her dignity intact and the respect of everyone who watched, because they saw what we all saw. A legend who refuses to be diminished, a professional who knows her worth, a woman who chose herself, and that's worth more than any late-night interview ever could be.